Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our virtual tour of Mary E. Smith Memorial Cemetery in Elsmere, Kentucky. Walter Baerges was born March 10, 1874, in Flemingsburg, Kentucky. Walter has one of the earliest birth dates of people buried in Mary E. Smith Cemetery, and he is amongst the oldest veterans in the cemetery and has the distinction of serving in the Philippine-American War. At the age of 25, Walter enlisted on October 26, 1899, and served in Company I, 49th Regiment of the Volunteer Infantry. The 49th Volunteer Infantry was an all-black regiment organized in 1899 at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and included over 2,600 enlisted men, largely from the southern U.S. The regiment was part of two all-black infantry regiments headed to the Philippines in January of 1900. By June, Baerges and the 49th Regiment were stationed in the Isabela province in the North Luzon area of the Philippines. Life in the Philippines was very difficult for the soldiers. There were outbreaks of diseases like dysentery, pneumonia, syphilis, and smallpox. Racial tension and discrimination occurred against the regiment by fellow white soldiers and officers. Back home in the U.S., many black leaders, including Booker T. Washington, voiced their objections to the war and sending black troops to fight against the Filipino army. The 49th Regiment was involved in many of the battles on the island, often being part of the first offensive or line. Their commanding officers noted that they fought bravely and courageously. The 49th Regiment was one of the last units to leave the Philippines in 1901. Baerges was discharged on June 30th, 1901 at San Francisco. After returning home from the war, Baerges suffered many health issues and received a disability pension in 1925. By 1930, Baerges had taken up residence at the U.S. National Homes for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers in Dayton, Ohio. After he was discharged, he moved to Covington. On July 24, 1954, Baerges died of a heart attack at his home at 1219 Chesapeake Avenue in Covington. He was 80 years old. His gravestone marker was provided for free by the Department of Veterans Affairs.
African-American physician and Covington community leader James Omar Randolph was born January 17, 1888 in Frankfort, Pike County, Missouri. His mother was Lizzie Randolph, born November 1860. According to census records, she was a washerwoman. She married Frank Randolph, born December 1857, on February 19, 1879 in Hannibal, Missouri. James was the grandson of a slave. He is also the oldest of 7 children in his family, including Edith, Fanny, Dolly, Frank, Montezella, and Catherine. His sister Edith was a dressmaker. Fanny was a servant for a private family as a young woman, but eventually became a mortician in New York. Dolly was a real estate broker in Los Angeles, and his brother Frank also lived in Los Angeles and worked as a police officer. Frank was shot in the line of duty, survived, but he had to retire early. James had a much younger brother, Montezella, but due to difference in age, James never got to spend much time with him as he would have liked. Montezella passed away in 1955. James did not know his youngest sister, Catherine, until many years later as well. They had a reunion as adults after he moved to Covington. Catherine was an ordained elder in the AMZ Zion Church. Out of all his siblings, he was closest with Edith. While in medical school on a break in Chicago, he was robbed of all his savings, and Edith came to his rescue, paid all his bills for the rest of his time in medical school. James attended Lincoln University, a historically black university in Jefferson City, Missouri, and earned his medical degree at Meharry College in Nashville, Tennessee in 1917. In his early 20s, he was a porter on a railroad, according to a 1910 census. An article from the Cincinnati Enquirer from February 1973 also mentioned how he would often surprise writers when he told them about attending medical school while also working as a porter. After school, he began practicing medicine in Shelbyville, Tennessee, where he met his first wife, Sarah Temple. Sarah died on January 21, 1959 in Covington, Kentucky. She was 60 years of age. He later married Loretta Spencer of Frankfort, Kentucky. In 1922, Dr. Randolph moved to Covington. During his time in Tennessee, Dr. Randolph survived on little money as a new doctor, and he was often paid for his services in eggs, ham, flour, and cornmeal. In an article from the Kentucky Post in 1973, he explained that he originally wanted to practice medicine in Western Kentucky, but classmates in medical school convinced him to try Covington due to its proximity to Cincinnati. He immediately established his practice at 1039 Greenup Street and spent the next 50 years practicing medicine in that location. In 1950, he moved the practice to 1002 Greenup. From the Cincinnati Enquirer in 2004, Randolph stated he charged $9 for house calls and office visits for $7. He was the first African-American physician to be on the staff of St. Elizabeth Hospital in Covington, and the first African-American physician to be a member of the Campbell Kitten Medical Society. Dr. Randolph received several honors in recognition of his work in the community. In 1976, L'Salette Academy awarded the doctor with a gold medal for his service to the community in the field of science. The city of Covington also named a park in the East Side neighborhood in honor of Dr. Randolph in 1975. In 1997, he was posthumously inducted into the Northern Kentucky Leadership Hall of Fame. Dr. Randolph was an active member of St. James AME Church in Covington. A garage was purchased and named after Randolph, another longtime church member, and was referred to as the Randolph-Jackson Fellowship Hall and Education Building. St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded in 1869 by Martha Ann Taylor, a Covington resident that invited friends and neighbors into her home for weekly religious services and Sunday school. Several locations were used for worship until the congregation was able to purchase the parish on 120 Lynn Street. After a series of location changes as the church was building a new parish, a new building was finished in 1922. Under the pastorate of Reverend F.D. Coleman, from 1927 to 1932, several improvements were made to the church. By 1942, however, the church was $3,600 in debt due to these upgrades. The Reverend Andrew White was then appointed pastor of the church and was able to pay off these debts. In 1959, the congregation financed the construction of a new parsonage for Reverend White. The church celebrated their 105th birthday in 1979 and was remodeled in 1986 under the administration of Reverend Edward L. Mack. Dr. James E. Randolph died on May 23, 1981, at the Baptist Convalescent Center in Newport, Kentucky. He was survived by a sister, 3 nieces, and 3 great-nieces. Funeral services were conducted at St. James AME Church in Covington, with burial at Mary E. Smith Cemetery in Elsmere. His wife, Loretta, was also heavily involved in church and Covington community as well. She was an accomplished woman in her own right, and she was the first woman president of the Covington Model City Advisory Board. The board was created in part to improve poor neighborhoods by making suggestions to the city commissioner and HUD housing. Loretta held several degrees, a BA from Kentucky State University, postgraduate work at Fisk University, and a master's degree from Indiana University. She was also an elementary teacher for many years in the northern Kentucky Cincinnati area and at Douglas High School in Lexington. In her obituary in the Cincinnati Enquirer, former Covington Mayor Carl Bowman stated, "She was a woman who dared speak her mind and was frequently right in doing so. Her passing is a tremendous loss to the Black community as well as the community in general." She is buried at Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville.
Alice Thornton Shinfessel was born in 1901 in Xenia, Ohio, to Reverend Isaac Thornton and Laura Mewks. Laura Thornton remarried in 1905 to Adam Mabry, and by 1920 had moved the blended family to Newport, Kentucky. Alice married Elmer Shinfessel in 1927. Elmer worked as a construction laborer. They had a daughter, Helena, in 1931, and they made their home in Covington at 331 East 12th Street. In 1941, Alice took a job as the first secretary of the newly opened Jacob Price Homes housing project in Covington. In 1953, Alice was nominated president of the newly formed L.B. Faust Civic League. The league was named in honor of L.B. Faust, the principal of William Grant High School and the first African-American graduate of Otterbein College in Westerville, Ohio. The L.B. Faust Civic League was established to enrich and support the Black community of Covington. Their first fundraiser was for a community center. By 1957, the group raised enough capital to purchase a property at 309 Bush Street. By 1958, the Civic League was operating a kindergarten for Black children at the center, and Alice served as a teacher. Alice also during this time became a civil rights advocate. She publicly accused the Covington City Commission of racial discrimination for lack of playgrounds and pools for the Black children of Covington. In 1954, there were 22 baseball diamonds operated by the city, and not one was open to Black children. As a result of her efforts, Covington Mayor John Maloney ordered a park and a pool for Black children to be built. In 1958, Alice supported in federal court Jesse Moore, a Black student who wanted to enroll in Holmes High School. Their efforts were successful, and Moore was the first Black student to enroll. The L.B. Faust Civic League also served as a local mechanism of the civil rights movement. Meetings were held about the Congress of Racial Equality, the Freedom Riders protest demonstrations, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Alice served as the president of the Covington chapter of the NAACP for many years. In later years, the League assisted local senior citizens through the Meals on Wheels program. Alice was a member of the First Baptist Church of Covington for more than 50 years. She served as church clerk and financial secretary. Alice died in 1983 at the age of 82, and she is buried with her husband Elmer here at Mary E. Smith Cemetery. In 2007, Alice was nominated for the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame. She received a plaque from the local chapter of the NAACP for outstanding community service, and she was named an outstanding senior citizen by the Junior Chamber of Commerce.
Wilma Porterfield was born April 16, 1909 in Elsmere, Kentucky, and died August 6, 1994 at the age of 85 in Elsmere, Kentucky. Her father, William, was born August 15, 1875. He lived in Scott County, Kentucky as a child. His parents were Orlando and Jane Cornell, and they are also buried at Mary E. Smith. William worked for many years on the railroad, at a foundry, and also at a steel mill. Wilma's mother, Mary Louise Walker Cornell, was born September 12, 1881, and died May 31, 1958. According to city directories and census records, she worked as a laundress and within house cleaning for a private family. Wilma's sister, Cora, was born July 23, 1900, died May 18, 1989, and she also worked in house cleaning for a private family. Cora also married Reverend John B. Porterfield. Wilma and her husband Earl, who worked at American Oak Leather Company in Cincinnati, have one child, Joyer. According to the 1940 census, Wilma, her husband Earl, and Wilma's parents all lived together in the same house in Elsmere for many years. Wilma started her career as a teacher at Lake and Grant School, class of 1922. As mentioned in an earlier stop, Dr. James E. Randolph was president at the groundbreaking for the school on May 4, 1931. Wilma taught 8th grade at Woken Heights School, which replaced the Dunbar School. During this time, Wilma would have worked with Rosella Porterfield, also mentioned earlier on the tour, who was a well-known and well-loved teacher and activist in the Elsmere area. And according to a 1995 Kentucky Post article, both women were honored at a reunion in Wilkins Heights School. From her obituary, Wilma also worked as a caseworker for the State Department of Human Resources. She also worked for the Cincinnati Recreation Committee for several years as an aide to several playgrounds at school districts. The school she taught at, the Dunbar School, was named after the African-American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar and was created in the 1880s to serve the growing number of African-American school children in the Northern Kentucky area. By 1936, there were over a dozen other schools in the state of Kentucky that are named after Paul Laurence Dunbar. The school was the first Black public school in Elsmere, located on Spring Street, and was originally called Spring Street School. It was a one-room schoolhouse that operated until the Woken Heights School opened in 1948. That school was built on land purchased by the prominent Wilkins family and operated as a segregated school until the 1954 Brown decision. Woken Heights was a much bigger school than Dunbar, with the campus containing 2 large classrooms, a kitchen, and a gym. There was a bit of controversy regarding the transition from the Dunbar School to Wilkins Heights. Dunbar had many structural issues with its building, and due to the increase in student population, the one-room school could not safely contain the large number of students needing to attend. While a new elementary school for white children in Elsmere was built in the fall of 1942, a new school for African-American children was still put on hold, with the excuse of a material shortage due to World War II. Parents decided to boycott the school by refusing to send their children there. Despite the boycott and even a King County health inspector stating the one-room schoolhouse was a violation, it took an apparent lawsuit before work on a new building was begun. Another teacher at the Dunbar School, Thomas R. Lewis, born July 16, 1909, and died in 2012, is also buried here in Mary E. Smith, along with his wife, Laura. He and Laura had one child, William. Thomas was the son of William and Nellie Green Lewis of Elsmere, Kentucky. According to census records, William worked on a railroad and Nellie was a public school teacher. Thomas also taught at Dunbar from the years of 1936 to 1939. Before he taught, Thomas was also a farmer in Union, Kentucky, on a farm he owned and operated. From a 1950 Kentucky Enquirer article, Thomas apparently filed a suit against a George Stahl from Hebron for $210, claiming Stahl stole from 25 hogs, including one that had cholera. Another interesting fact about Thomas was that he was a pro-professional baseball player for the Lexington Hustlers Negro League baseball team. And at one point, Thomas even pitched against Satchel Paige when he was in the league. And from the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia, the origins of the Lexington Hustlers is largely unknown, though it could be traced back to February 26, 1911, when the Lexington Leader reported that the team had played the previous week. In its early years, the club only played other Kentucky teams, occasionally playing against white clubs as well, including various teams in the Cincinnati area. By the 1940s, the Hustlers were integrated their own team by allowing white players to join as well. The inclusion of white players led the Chicago Defender newspaper to dub them the Team of Democracy. At this point, the team was playing to thousands of fans, and some games were even broadcast on WLEX at Lexington. Big name stars of their time, like Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, played against the Hustlers. However, the team had to disband in 1952 after the murder of its star pitcher, Willie Swope.
Charles Dudley was born March 15, 1887, in Louisa County, Virginia, to Edmund and Barbara Dudley. He wrote on his World War I draft registration card on June 5, 1917, that he was single, living in Eagle, West Virginia, and was employed as a miner at the St. Clair Coal Mining Company. He was the sole source of income for his father, and his race was Ethiopian. On June 16, 1917, Charles married his first wife, Josie Anderson, in Fayette County, West Virginia. Charles was 31 years old, and his wife Josie was 28. A short month later, on August 3, 1918, Dudley enlisted during World War I at Eagle, West Virginia. Dudley served in the 803rd Pioneer Infantry Company I. His unit was sent to the Toul sector of France in October of 1918 and served in the frontline trenches as infantry until the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. In Addie W. Hutton and Katherine M. Johnson's book, Two Colored Women with the American Expeditionary Forces, they describe the soldiers of the 803rd as famed hard workers and hard fighters. On July 5, 1919, Charles Dudley returned back to the United States from France aboard the USS Philippine. He was formally discharged on July 24, 1919, in San Francisco. By 1940, Charles Dudley had remarried and was living with his second wife, Lizzie Johnson, and son William at 324 Stewart Street in Covington. Charles was working as a laborer on a sewer project. He was also employed by the WPA in Erlanger. The WPA provided jobs in construction, infrastructure, and agriculture. In 1951, a devastating fire occurred at the Dudley home at 2200 Franklin Avenue, causing an estimated damage of $2,800. Dudley died on June 22, 1956, in Covington, Kentucky. He was 69 years old. His wife Lizzie died 4 years later, and she is also buried here at Mary E. Smith Cemetery.
Benny Richard Butler was born October 20th, 1938, in Georgetown, Kentucky, to Eileen Alberta Wallers Butler and Harold Butler. Eileen and Harold met in Georgetown, Kentucky, married, and eventually moved to Covington, where they lived until Harold's death in 2004. Georgetown, Kentucky, and Scott County in particular, has a long history of African American populations there. Some of these small towns include Zion Hill, Watkinsville, and New Zion, which were all formed after a migration of African Americans to the west who had returned to Scott County in the 19th century. Benny is one of four siblings: Harold Jr., Calvin, and Marlene. Benny's mother was a housekeeper for many years until her retirement. She was active until her death in 2018 at the age of 102. According to her obituary, she volunteered at the Northern Kentucky Community Center, working in their clothing store. His father was a World War II veteran, and he mentions in an article about his work at the Cincinnati Museum Center, "I was waiting for my father in the rotunda of the Union Terminal in a sea of people and hustle bustle. It looked like Times Square on New Year's Eve. I'll never forget seeing my huge father come off the train with his big army bag slung over his shoulder and his shiny black boots clicking along the terminal floor as he walked to my mother and me." Harold's company, 585 Port Company, was a Black Army unit stationed in Crookston, Glasgow, UK. After his tour of duty during World War II, Harold returned to Covington and began a career in construction. Benny also held many jobs throughout his lifetime, including working alterations throughout the 1950s and 60s, according to Covington City directories. Benny mainly worked, though, for the Ford Motor Company and retired there as an auto worker in the late 1990s. Benny was very active in saving and promoting African American history in the Northern Kentucky area. As one of the founding members of the Northern Kentucky African American Heritage Task Force, he successfully campaigned for the preservation of local historic landmarks, including the Rosella Porterfield Park in Elsmere in 2003 and the Rosenwald School in Dry Ridge, Kentucky in 2005. Rosella Porterfield was one of two African American teachers to instruct at the Dunbar School in Elsmere. Porterfield was an influential community educator, librarian, and civil rights activist, and she taught grades 1st through 8 at the school. The Rosenwald School building program of the early 20th century grew out of a vision for the educational reform for African Americans initiated by Booker T. Washington, principal of the Tuskegee University in Alabama. Washington developed a plan to educate African Americans in the South as part of his educational philosophy of advancing education for African Americans across the country. Through his partnership with Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears Roebuck Company, Washington developed a plan to fund and build schools in rural Southern communities. Benny himself was a product of an all-African American high school, the Baerges High School in Cincinnati's West End neighborhood. Originally called Blessed Martin School in what was in St. Christina's Parish, it opened its doors for 49 Black students of grades 3 to 8 in 1935. Their classrooms were located in a building which housed church, school, and a rectory. Only 9 pupils were Catholic, but the purpose of the school was to help make converts among the African American population of Lincoln Heights neighborhood in Cincinnati. In 1939, a new brick building was opened, then accepting grades 1 to 8. And by 1960, there were over 160 pupils enrolled in the school. A few years after the canonization of Martin de Porres, this parish petitioned for a change of name, so officially in 1970, church and school became St. Martin de Porres. In 1977, the school closed and pupils were sent to Glendale neighborhood schools. Benny was also passionate about preserving African American cemeteries, especially within smaller, more rural counties throughout Kentucky. This led him to launching the Northern Kentucky African American Graveyard Recording Project in collaboration with Northern Kentucky University's archaeology program. The goal of the project was to map African American and segregated cemeteries in 13 Northern Kentucky counties. A benefit of mapping and recording these cemeteries is to not only have the information such as names, dates, family members found on gravestones preserved, but possibly help mitigate future destruction by alerting developers to these historic sites. He also volunteered his time to helping other groups preserve African American cemeteries. From a 1999 Kentucky Inquirer article, Benny aided the Boone County Historic Preservation Group in cleaning up and restoring the old Burlington Cemetery. His main project was working with another participant to reset a gravestone of a 4-year-old boy who died in 1875. And lastly, volunteering his time to provide educational opportunities to minority youth, and was also a part of the Heritage Task Force. Butler organized trips to Underground Railroad safe houses in King County and Boone County, with stops at Riverside Drive, Holmes, and Covington, and at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House in Cincinnati. He also coordinated campus visits to local colleges for high school students as well. The task force was not limited to volunteer just with youth, but also taking time to visit local senior citizen homes as well. In a 1999 article from the Kentucky Post, Benny states that we idolize old trees and antiques, but when it comes to old people, it's like we push them off to the side and we miss all the wisdom they have to share.